to where in the country it is.
I mean, the level maybe. Like, I wouldn't want to go to like United or City.
Yeah.
You know, I want him to play. So maybe Hull would be better.
Yeah, someone that's actually like likely to get, because you say he's going in the 21s.
Yeah.
So then it'll be like you want him to have a pathway into the team.
Yeah.
Rather
So he's 16. He went with the 18s during the week, and then today, tomorrow, I think yesterday he was with the 21s. So he's 16, playing like 5 years up.
Wow.
So.
And then today, is it like a negotiation? You're gonna go over?
No. Like, he can't go until he's 18. So they're just being proactive with.
Okay, having a look at him.
Yeah.
He'll fly back to Canada, and then maybe when he turns 18.
This time next year they could sign him because he'll turn 18 at the beginning of the following year.
Yeah, that's pretty cool though. I don't know that clubs would do that kind of thing, like try and be so like proactive, which sounds silly. I'm a Chelsea fan as well, so like Chelsea were terrible for it, where we used to go to like Africa and
they got transfer ban for it.
Yeah, we got transfer bans for it, didn't we? Because we had was it Christian Atsu? There's a couple players which we signed. I think Christian Atsu was Ghanaian.
Bertrand Traore, maybe.
We signed him when he was. I think we tried to get him, or we poached him when he was too young. There's a lot of players that we like bought people like houses in other countries.
Lucas Piazon days.
Yeah, they were really bad like back in the day.
So like they try to be proactive. Like it's not like Neymar, but you know, like it's sort of the thing. Like they buy him from Santos when he's 16.
Yeah.
So that Real Madrid, Chelsea can't come in.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you'd want to lock in a club like Hull like that because they can fluctuate pretty quickly. Yeah,
they could like either be near the top of the championship one season, maybe get relegated the next season.
If they get relegated this year, then relegated next year, they'll be going.
Yeah, I feel like Hull's quite an established championship
that's
team.
what people are saying.
Yeah,
but
shouldn't be too much fluctuation. I think it'd be within the league though that they'd probably go up and down.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think if you're a young player, you just want to get the pro contract, and you just want to be playing. What do you think the difference is?
Are we going now?
Yeah, sorry, we are recording. Yeah. I'm very like we literally just like go straight into the comments. It's a bit of a I'll do a small intro. Go on. Hi guys, welcome back to the Stoic Athlete podcast. I've got my guest today is Michael Tate. Michael is a football agent, Canadian football agent. Is that a better way of putting it? Are you Canadian? Because do you represent mainly Canadian players?
American players too.
American and Canadian players.
But yeah, North American focus, but a Canadian agent, yeah.
Cool, yeah, Canadian agent representing a lot of North American sort of talent. So today, a bit of a general conversation, sort of around how Michael will support his players, and sort of just go through a bit of Michael's experience as well. So what we're talking about, changing from Canada, like Canadian Premier League football, because that's where he's at the moment, that player, right? So going from there to like English football, how often has that happened for like your players? And then do you see like, is there a change in demands? Like how do you sort of support the player as they transition over? So like say for example this whole one, you've managed to get flights paid for and accommodation and stuff paid for. So is that quite a commonplace thing when you get players like a trial, especially like a young player?
I think it definitely depends on the level of interest from the club. Like if the player is out of contract, then maybe the club will be more inclined to pay him or to pay for the flight over or the accommodation. But if they're under contract, it's more of like a scouting approach, right? They want to send their scouts to the game or watch, Instat or Y-Scout. These are like databases that have all the matches. So I don't think they would typically be having trialists when they're signed to pro contracts, but because you mentioned like the Canadian League is new, it's only been around for maybe like 6 or 7 years and maybe 5 or 6 years, and the league knows that they need to promote the players. So even though the players are under contract, the clubs will be flexible to allow them to trial with other clubs.
Is it because that would elevate the profile of the league as well?
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of good players coming out of here, like Alphonso Davies is Canadian, right? If he'd have come out of the Canadian league, probably would have done a lot for that league to promote them or push them up, and people would actually start to notice it. Because, I mean, for me, when I think of North American football, I just think of like MLS. Is normally I never really would have thought about the Canadian leagues of football, but that obviously is where like you've got your young player coming from. I assume you've probably got a few clients in that league as well, right? So is the aspiration for a lot of those players to move to European football, or is it to just build the game in Canada?
Yeah, it's definitely as a platform to move on. I think you mentioned Alphonso Davies, like the league wasn't in existence when he was coming through, right? So he had to go through the Whitecap system, but maybe if the league was there, he would have, had an option to go there. But typically, I think like the reason I became an agent was because I came up playing in Toronto, and there was only really Toronto FC to play for, and there's so much talent, and it's sort of like I wanted to find a way that I couldn't find myself. So I wanted to create a path for players that I ran into a wall on my own. So I ended up going to school and studying sports law, and then I came back, and I think in that time the opportunities for players has increased because you've had the introduction of the Canadian League, and now there's 2 more MLS teams since the time that I mentioned. So I think the goal is just a platform for them to sign and play professionally, and then as the years have gone by, we've seen a lot of players go to the MLS, Scottish Premier League, English maybe League One, Belgian Second Division. So it's a good platform, and it's sort of like I tell the players, like, you need to be a pro in your local environment, because if I'm trying to pitch to clubs in Europe or overseas, and they're saying like, well, if he's not a pro in his backyard, sometimes it's hard to convince them.
How would he translate that to them being a pro in and up? Because the demands change so much, right? That if you go from an amateur or semi-professional player in your, like you said, like in your backyard, and then you go to a professional club where you train every single day and the expectations are maybe higher. The club wants to know that the player has already experienced that before signing them, right? So that's where like the prominence of the league in Canada, and I guess, cause is it Toronto FC and then the Whitecaps are another Canadian team as well, right?
Montreal as well.
Montreal, yeah. So you've got like at least some of those teams in the MLS, which Canadian players, you'd imagine that there's not as much of an academy system now, is that they're trying to integrate it. I think that's one of the things Beckham was really like big on with the MLS, is to integrate an academy system. But if they're not in those systems, they need to demonstrate that they are playing a certain level of like professional football to be able to get those moves to like European.
Yeah, the sort of the area that I would say can help these players are, there's only so many contracts that Toronto FC can give out to their academy. Like the academy system in the MLS is very established now, and there's academy tournament this weekend actually in California with like, it's incredible. There's 30 fields in Indio, California. It's like in the desert almost, and it's just like a festival of football. But there's only so many contracts. So a lot of the MLS clubs sort of direct the players towards the NCAA because they train them to be top players, but again, there's only so many contracts. So then the American players look to the USL, right? The league below the MLS. And that's a way to become professional if they're set on that. And there was nothing like that in Canada for Canadian players. So
that's like the American Championship, isn't it? Like the USL.
Yeah.
But they're not linked. There's no like relegation and promotion between the two leagues at the moment, is there?
Not yet. Between MLS and USL, no.
No. Okay.
But there's leagues below the USL. There's USL
promotion
Championship, League One. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
But I don't think they get promoted because the resources for some of the top clubs are completely different than the resources for the lower clubs. Like some of the lower clubs are strictly for college students to play in the season or in the off season in the summer, and that's like maybe USL League 2. It's not so much of a they're trying to progress. I'm sure they would like to, but it takes a lot of resources, and they need to have a stadium and staff, and it's not so easy, I think, just by getting promoted. They need some sort of support as well.
The landscape is very different in, I'd say, like Canadian and American football, isn't it? Of like that promotion thing not being, and promotion relegation just not being a thing, and having the draft is very, very different. I'm very interested in like you sort of said before, like for you growing up, that playing football you're from Toronto, aren't you? Yeah. So they're playing football.
There or thereabouts.
There or thereabouts.
People from Toronto would say no. It's closer to Hamilton. I'm from Burlington.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's close.
So yeah, I don't know Canada that well.
It's close enough.
Close enough. Yeah, I'll stick with Toronto. So you sort of around that Toronto area, and there's not the opportunities to play, and that sounded to me like it was a big motivation to go into doing what you do now. So like being an agent. How much of a driving force was that for you to go on and almost create a platform for Canadian American players to then have that maybe developmental pathway to be able to go on to play professional football in Europe or even like South America, or if they can just move out of the American and Canadian systems, and because there's just more money elsewhere, really, isn't there? How much of a motivator was that for you to go into doing what you do now?
Probably as the biggest motivator, I think. Like, I'm sure everybody who works in football in some capacity wanted to be a player at some point, right? And they couldn't, and
That's both me and you sat here today.
Right. Right. So I think that's sort of what it was, and it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't going to happen. You know, I dropped out of my university program. It took me 8 years to graduate the degree, which was a 4-year degree. So I would trial. I went to Motherwell on trial when I was 21.
What, in Scotland?
In Scotland, yeah.
No way.
And they were saying like, yeah, you're good enough, but you're 21, and our second team's 20, so you're too old for them, but you're not good enough, so go, be a journeyman. And I was Premier League or bust for me, so it took a while for me to there's other ways to stay involved in football. And I went to school and studied sports law, and then I came back to Canada. I worked for an agency there, and I think it's only, I would say only in the last 2 years or a year that I've came to terms with the fact that I'm okay with not making it, because I've seen the players progress that I have helped to get their first pro contract, and they're much better than I was. So it's better for the country, I think, and I think I'm getting the vicarious glory, let's say, that I wanted as a player through them. So living through their experiences and getting to see it. And I think it's quite interesting because as a sports psychologist working with someone, like, their achievements aren't necessarily your achievements, but when they do well, it fills you with a sense of like pride, or like I guess pride is the right word, of you've maybe made an impact with them and you've supported them to do that. And it's quite interesting that like agents, people often think of agents as being more detached and like money driven, and especially when you think of like what's his name, Mino Raiola, like quite often you think of agents in that way. But the way that you've just spoken about your players, of like, I get to live through them, like I didn't get to quite do it, I wasn't maybe quite good enough at the time, but now I can see like if I can help them to do it, it fills me with a sense of sort of pride and reward. Do you think that's an important thing, or how much of a value do you have in or place on like seeing your players do well, in comparison to like, obviously the financial stuff is always a driver, but it sounds like to me that seeing your players actually do well and go on to do something with their career almost sounds like more important to you than just like getting a good payday. I think people who have worked in football before me have told me like, don't do it for the money, and do it for the passion. And I don't think I would get to that point where the finances are rewarding if I don't have the relationship with the players at first, you know. And to be honest, it's not the most financially rewarding, avenue right now. But it's more important, I think, for me right now in my stage of this career to focus on my relationships. I don't think I'll change that as I progress. I mean, hopefully not. But I think for agents that work like that are focused financially, it's almost like they're just doing deals, right? And because they're so advanced in their career that people trust them. Like, for instance, somebody like me, let's say, comparing myself to Raiola, maybe I speak to the head scout or the head of the academy, where Raiola is maybe speaking directly to the owner. Right? And that way the conversations are always financial. It's not going to be about what type of person is he, or is his father, overbearing, or does he get into trouble? It's mainly because that professional player is already established. So I think once I help establish some professional players, then maybe the strictly financial conversations will happen. But
then maybe your role changes a little bit.
maybe.
But at the moment, relationship is a big thing. And for me as a sports psych, I always have to preface this, in training, I'm still training. But I always put massive emphasis on relationship above anything else. And my first session is just so focused on building a strong relationship with the client, because I know if I build a good relationship with them first, I'm going to get buy-in from them, and they're going to trust me, and they'll trust me when I tell them like this could help them or this could help them. How do you go about then like building that relationship with, because you've got to deal with a lot of different stakeholders, like you've got the parents, for example. You said, oh, is this parent overbearing, or are they quite supportive? Or then you've got to deal with like an academy manager, and there's lots of different people you have to manage those relationships with. What's sort of your approach then, either with the players or with members of different clubs? Like talked about Hull today, you obviously would have had to be in like conversation with them to sort that out.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go around forming those relationships? As you say, you're quite an early career like agent and practitioner. Practitioner is probably not the right word.
It's a bit
agent.
More than I offer, I think.
Yeah. But how do you go about like building the relationships with the client, your players, and then agents and other agents and clubs?
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of different stakeholders. I've definitely I've learned how to prioritize things, I think, as I've progressed. For sure, the number one priority is the player.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't change. I think clubs, it's tough to trust clubs because there's a lot of turnover, right? And if I bring a player to X club and they love him, and then the sporting director gets fired and the coach gets fired, I'm still, the relationship is still with the player, but maybe with the club isn't there anymore. So I need to make sure everything, I'd say my priority is always with the player, but of course you need people who are going to sign your players, and you need people to, I guess, help with transfer fees. It's very, I don't want to say, it's very interconnected. Let's put it that way. And definitely, sometimes you burn. I won't think I've burned bridges, but sometimes people are upset with you, but they know that you're only doing what's best for your player. And like I said at the beginning, for example, in Toronto, there's so much talent, but only one team.
Yeah.
So now with the Canadian League being created, there's 3 more teams in Ontario that are professional, they get to compete against Toronto and the MLS clubs in the Canadian FA Cup. They get to play in the Champions League of CONCACAF. So that's
very cool.
It's a bit of a competition to Toronto FC, right? And for me, I'm working with players that maybe Toronto FC have identified. They're in their academy, but they're not promoting them to the first team.
Yeah.
So
now there's this other amazing opportunity. Right. If you don't give my player this, then I can just take him over to this, because I've got X, Y, and Z club that's now interested in. I wasn't like little Timmy, who's like, well, it's probably not little Timmy because they're a little bit older than that. But like, you've now got all these like other opportunities to put your players forward for.
And you don't want to like give them an ultimatum, but like at the same time, your client's career is on the line, let's say, and if you don't, like if they don't promote him to the second team, maybe he's with the 18s and his development stagnates a little bit, whereas if he went to another professional club, maybe the level's not as high, but he's playing against 30-year-old men and, in an environment where he needs to work every day. And I think that I've done that a couple times now. I've done, I would say, 3 or 4 players from, let's say, from an MLS academy to a professional club. Yeah. And they seem to tell me like they didn't expect the demands to be so consistent. Like they realize, okay, I'm on the 18s. I know I'm starting up front on the weekend. Like we practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. No matter what happens in training, I'm gonna play. Yeah. And I'm gonna start.
They've cemented their role.
I'm on penalties. Yeah. And then they go to the men's team, and even the rondos at the beginning of the session, if they're not on it, they're getting, they're
not
getting
abuse, but they're like, it's the banter that goes around in football. There's a lot of high expectations in, especially elite level sport, right? Specifically football. So when you say the demands are consistent, as in the demands are consistently high.
Yeah, every day they tell me like I have to be as best as I can every day. I can't really take a day off because I might not make the bench on the weekend, and then I'm treading water basically week to week. So I think it's a good wake-up call in the fact that they're competing for something throughout 8 months or 10 months, whereas maybe in the academy system there's a tournament here, and then there's a couple friendly games, and it's not as, which it's obvious, but I think for players when they experience it, it's a bit of a wake-up call. But the ones that adapt seem to thrive a little bit. Yeah.
So how do you as the agent then, I guess, like facilitate that? Like, because you're not a sports psychologist. Like, for example, like if they came to you with like issues with confidence and things, not that it's a bad thing because you're probably like really good at what you do specifically. It's like you're not expected to be a psychologist, but almost as the agent, because you're not expected to have the training in those things, but you probably pick up that role every so often. Do you know what I mean? That they're going to come to you for advice, or they're going to come to you because they're struggling with something and they want you to reassure them, or it's like you have to wear a lot of different hats or spin a lot of different plates as an agent, right? Jumping from different roles to talking to the parents, talking to the club, and then making sure your player's okay. So then how do you manage that as the agent where, say you've put a player into a new club and they've come to you and they've said, like I just have to be at my best every day, and I don't know how I do that. Like, I've done 1 week of it and I feel great, but one session I was a 5 and the next session I was an 8, and my form sort of like goes and ebbs and flows. How do you as an agent then sort of support the player with that sort of challenge that they face?
It's difficult. Yeah, sometimes it's you need to speak to the club a little bit to get feedback, because the feedback is subjective from the player, right? He's going to say, I am the best player in training, but I'm not. But maybe you speak to the coach and he's not in the weight room after their session when everybody else is, or he was late to training. He was good at training, but he was late. And there's little things that maybe you can tweak. But I think, a young player going into a professional environment, the expectation from the agent side is not that he'll play, but he'll develop. But when they come from, like I just said, playing every week at under 18s, and now they're not playing, like, they're soccer, football players, not football practicers, right? I heard Landon Donovan say a quote yesterday. I like that, so I need to cite that reference. But it's true, because you want to be playing and training with Real Madrid or playing with Girona. It's an argument to have, but sometimes it involves sort of liaising between the club and the expectations that maybe the player has or the family has. Yeah. And then if they're in an environment where they are struggling, it's a good thing, because you don't want to be the best player on the 18s at 18, right? You want to be the worst player on the team.
Being like the big fish in the small pond. Yeah. Or the top of the bottom division, or like rather than being like at the bottom of like a top division team, even if it's like you said, Girona. Last year Girona had a really good season. Was it last year? Yeah. But like you'd rather be playing full time, lots of minutes for Girona than, well, this is my personal view, that rather than sitting on the bench for Real Madrid. But then the allure of playing for a huge club like that is then very difficult to turn down.
Yeah, I'm not at that stage yet, but I think like players transitioning to a first team, coming from that, it's definitely difficult. And maybe I would need to speak to a psychologist to help them.
I'm always here, mate.
Typically the clubs are good, but like I've said before, they are biased in what they offer. And I think a lot of times there's a difficulty in the MLS between developing and winning, because there's so much turnover. I'm sure it's the same in Europe, but there's a lot of turnover, and the coaches need to win. So they're not going to waste time teaching them to play out of the back when they can, reduce the risk of getting scored on by punting it up the field, and then the players don't really develop. But different clubs, different coaches are. So to answer your question, I think you need to. It's subjective. It depends on the player, but you need to also speak, I think, to the club and see, okay, what can you do differently, and then go back. And then you can always have some other option. Maybe it is a change of environment that he needs. Like, I've had cases where I've worked with my client, and he's at a big club in Europe on the under 23s, and he just seems to be hitting a glass ceiling. Yeah. He can never break through, and it starts to affect him personally. He gets homesick.
And you can notice he just needs that move. He needs to go somewhere where he's supported or he's getting playing time. Or do you feel a responsibility in that as well? That
Yeah,
if you pick that up in the player to go.
A lot of
I need to do
sleepless nights
something.
I've had because of
Yeah.
players wanting a new opportunity, but maybe they're not so established that you can't use their footage because that's the whole problem in the first place. They're not playing. So how do you get a new environment for a player that doesn't have the greatest exposure?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's a lot of phone calls, a lot of reassuring, and then you need to look at other options. Sometimes, I think for the most part, clubs cooperate if they see a player is struggling, because they want the best for the player, right? And then also they don't want to. It's so competitive that they could use the salary on somebody that maybe would be better suited.
Chelsea's a great example of that. Like, as a Chelsea fan, like, say Raheem Sterling, massive amount of money that he's on, and we've brought in a lot of other young players that are on significantly less money than he is. But if we could offload him, that would free up a lot of money to maybe pay academy players more, or just on the books, balance the books a little bit better for the club. But in terms of the development thing, is that Chelsea as a club, the thing about winning all the time sort of fell away for the last couple of seasons, and the clubs appeared to have an image of just development, of just being a club that develops young players, and eventually we'll get to the point where we start winning things again. But for now, it's about, and you hear Maresca talk about it, and this is one thing I really love about him, is that he talks about improving all the individuals as a team would then help them to win games. And I don't need to focus so much on like the team performance as long as I improve each of the players individually. And the reason why that sort of cropped up for me in my mind was that he talked about like change of environments, and one of the big things I noticed, and he scored Wednesday, was Jadon Sancho, was that when he's moved from United and what seems and appears to be quite a toxic environment, and he's moved to a club like Chelsea, just that small change of environment where he wasn't playing for a while, he got like excommunicated isn't the right word, exiled out to the Netherlands for a while to go and do some training, and the change of environments then, so go to Dortmund, and then he's now on loan at us, and you can see from my perspective, he looks like a completely different player. He looks like the player like old Sancho, and for me that seems to be an important thing, and you play a big role in that changing of environments for the player. Of then I guess the next thing is like, how do you pick the right club? How do you make sure that the players had a tough time at X club, and you're looking to change the environment and get them a new club? How do you make sure that Y club that you're moving them onto, or Z club that you're going to move them onto, is the right fit for that player? What's sort of the process you go through for that?
Well, you need to, I think, understand the player. From a personal perspective, like typically the agency that I work for and sort of my approach now is like for players from North America to go to Europe for the first time. Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, the cultures are pretty similar. Yes, they speak German or Dutch, but they speak English, and the weather's the same. It's similar. It's definitely European, but because they can't come to the UK anymore, obviously the UK would be the easiest, but because they can't, you need to find other countries that the culture is the same. And sometimes in places like France or Italy and Spain, like it's a little bit more culturally specific to that place, and it's tough for Canadians maybe to integrate if they don't speak that language, or they're not, that's not their ethnicity. So sometimes places like that are good if it's their first pro contract, but I think after that you kind of need to evaluate the coach. Like somebody like you said, Maresca, I haven't heard that in a long time. Since like under 15, 16, the development seems to be translated now to tactics and inverted this and false that. And
so
I think
much emphasis put on that, right?
Yeah, but you forget the fact that they are still only 21, 22. They have another 5-6 years to develop.
If not more. Like was it Henderson and Milner? As much as I'm not a massive Liverpool fan, I don't really like them as a club. but like, sorry, Abdi, I see you looking up. Are you a Liverpool fan? No? Good. But one thing I liked about them when I've heard them speak is that as much as they are senior players, they still talk about developing and growing. And yeah, you don't hear it so much about coaches wanting to develop players as much at this level or at the elite level of sport, which is quite disappointing. But you said about like moving players to clubs that fit them and understanding the player, and
that contradicts what I've said, because you need to look also at like the style of play.
For sure.
You know, what the formation is. If like if you have a player that's maybe a center back and they play 3-5-2, okay, that's a good spot to be.
You can fit across the three, or especially if you've got like a left-footed centre back that could play in the middle or be the left of the three, or so. Again, I'll go back to Chelsea. Like Levi Colwell's quite
versatile, right?
Yeah, a very versatile player that he could go left back. He could be the left of a three. He could play the middle if you really wanted to. And he did this against, I think, Leicester. We had an injury and he moved over to the right of the three, or like he's quite versatile. And yeah, I think you're starting to see that the club really matters with players now. Whereas I think before it wasn't as much of an importance. It appeared players used to just slot in a lot easier. Whereas now, because of the systematic demands of like the tactics they're going to play and what the manager's like, and I don't know whether there's more ego in football now or not, but maybe not. But it appears to be a lot more of an issue. But I do think that you're seeing a lot more, from my perspective, I've seen a lot more like Canadian and American players coming over to Europe, and especially when you look at the Bundesliga, there's a lot of players there. Standard Liège, is it Buchanan plays for Standard Liège?
He plays for Inter Milan now.
Inter Milan now, so he's got to move to Inter Milan.
He was at Club Brugge, yeah.
Club Brugge, so like, but you're seeing that, and I think it's similar to the model that a lot of young English players have taken. So was it Jeremy Bino Gittens moved to Borussia Dortmund? You had Samuel Ealing Jr. moved to Juventus, and now he's gone back to Aston Villa. And you see a lot of young players are moving into European football with, like you said, similar cultures that then give them greater opportunities to play. Was that something that you looked at from young English players, or was that something that you sort of just thought yourself that like, these are the right countries to get my players into if I can?
It's sometimes a visa issue too, like work permits. Like getting into the UK is difficult,
now,
right? But for Canadians to get into Germany, you can get like work visas pretty easily compared to maybe, I don't know, other countries. So, but there's like regulations, employment regulations in each country. So like for Holland, it might be, you know, it's tough to say on record, but it's about, let's say 200,000 they need to give for an international player, like somebody who's not from the EU. So for Canadians, South Americans, Asian, African, you need to hit this threshold of a salary. So it's basically like to protect the local players.
So in order for them to get the visa, they have to have a salary of 200,000.
It might be something like that.
Or around that figure.
Yeah, like so. In order to sign an international, you need to pay this amount. In Belgium, it's like 80,000. So it's a lot easier in Belgium than Holland because it's cheaper. But in places like in Italy or Spain, they don't have like a financial threshold. It's like just a number. So they say like 4 internationals for the whole squad. So from
like
first
a max
team,
number of
let's say 4 or 5. It depends. Like, so they're not going to use like Juventus. They're not going to use it on like an 18-year-old unproven Canadian.
No.
They'll use it on Weston McKennie. From the States, right? So
we know he's proven. We know that he's
or like Douglas Costa or Brazilians, you know. So that's typically why those countries work, because the visas are a little bit easier.
Okay, because that's not something I would even have considered, the like inner workings of like how expensive it is to get that visa and the fee the club has to pay, and that obviously plays a massive role. Like undoubtedly that could impact massively the country that you go to, or like you said, like choosing the right countries that are more likely. Like Italy, you're probably not going to get in as easily because the fee is much higher, but with Belgium, like you said, is say only 80k, as if it's not a lot of money, but like £80,000 for the club, they can probably pay that, and they're more willing to pay those fees to bring players in. That is a very interesting sort of insight, to be fair. I'd never thought of that. Never even considered that as being like a factor that you as the agent would have to consider.
It's almost like the conversation starter, conversation ender. Sometimes they say like, okay, he looks good, but what passport does he have? And if you just say Canadian and not European, they're like, well, he's not as good as somebody in our academy. Like if we have to use an international slot, we'd rather promote a local guy.
Yeah.
You know, and then like positionally as well, like for instance, like in Belgium, directors have told me like we produce very technical players. If you're not at a technical standard by 15, 16, like you're kind of pushed aside. Whereas in Canada and maybe in the States as well,
physicality.
It's a bit more physical, right?
Yeah.
They kind of just, if you're big and fast, you can play. So as it progresses, Belgium don't have players. This is the words of the director, right? They need players that are more physical and more athletic, but obviously have a technical baseline. So that's where the gap comes in. For players like, you know, Alphonso Davies to shine there. Maybe a center midfielder might not make it in Germany because they have so many technical center midfielders, right? So
so the position is also important.
I think Canadians can exceed with their physical, and Americans with their physical and ability.
That does make sense. Like again, like in France do produce a lot of really like technical players, but is it Jonathan David? I feel like I get his name wrong. Jonathan David. Yeah, like maybe he brings something that they don't have or they're not getting from like the French national players. That he's very physical, he's very fast, and then he's also great in the technical ability that he can finish a ball and he makes great runs and all these things that maybe they were missing in that game in their like their academy or the players they were recruiting. So he's a good fit, and the same with Buchanan going to then Club Brugge and then to Inter Milan. Like Belgium were maybe missing that bit of like a pacey winger that's going to take someone on, and like they're because they're so focused on technical development. Is it then on you to then do a lot of research around like the countries, or do you feel like as you're progressing and getting more experience as an agent, you're now understanding like the demands of each country, or that this country wants this type of player now? Like I know I can take this 16-year-old, for example, to Hull because they're looking for this type of player now, or I can take him to Belgium because they're looking for a big, strong centre-back because all their centre-backs are too just technical and they need a big guy that's maybe a bit of a bully that can hold their own in that sort of. So as your experience grows, are you sort of starting to understand that a little bit more of, okay, I know him, I know the player very well, he would be a great fit for that club, and then you start to try and like start the conversation. Is it a lot of you initiating conversations with clubs?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as my players progress, the attention will come. Like the player I mentioned he's quite popular now, but it is a little bit of that. But sometimes the coach will change and like, we're going in a different direction. But I think for the most part, League One, let's say, they're looking for center backs to be 6'3" and powerful. Whereas maybe a 5'10" center back, they wouldn't even look at because the height isn't there. Never mind how he plays. Let's say so. It's a generalization.
In Spain, they might take him because he's really technical and he's a bit smaller, like Eric Garcia, for example, who's like quite a small but technical centre back.
Lisandro Martinez, So I mean, all roads lead to Rome, right? If you're in the market and you're on Y-Scout or Instat on Transfer Market, the scouting departments are so good now that I don't think any stone goes unturned. But you get to learn what sort of players certain countries look for, I think, and what sort of players Canadians can fit into easily based on their individual attributes, but also like maybe the stereotype of the type of football that the club plays or the country plays.
Is there a stereotype of what a Canadian player is? Of like a Canadian footballer? Would you say there's a stereotype, or like you could say like Canadian players are like this? Like
I actually don't think you could, no. Because it's kind of cool in Canada. Like it's not so much anymore because it's progressed so much as a population, but I think when I was growing up, if you played football, your parents were immigrants.
Okay.
Yeah, like my parents are from Scotland. My friends, all of our friends are Argentinian, Polish.
Through football.
Just through football, and all my parents are best friends as well. So, but if you played like ice hockey, typically your parents were Canadian, and then it seems there's definitely Canadians whose kids played soccer when I was growing up, and as I would say the demographic is evolving now. My kids would play soccer, and I'm Canadian. So, but growing up, that's sort of what it was like. So there wasn't any style that was consistent,
you could, like,
right?
fall into,
Everyone was all a different type of culture. So I think if you look at the national team as well, they're all from different backgrounds. They're all maybe first generation, second generation. It won't go past second generation Canadian.
Like, Alphonso Davies was a refugee, wasn't he? That moved into Canada, and it is interesting the thing in Canada, and it's also the same in the States as well. I would say that from when I was there, my experience was that I go and play pickup games. Didn't know what a pickup game was before I went to the States. So is pickup games a thing in Canada as well?
Pickup, it's like 5-a-side here, I guess.
Yeah, like 5-a-side, but like we just go to a park, and then there'd be a group of people, and it would be me and this guy Kem, and we'd go down and we'd join these pickup games, and I'd say 80% of the people were probably like Latino background, so they were like Mexican, or I'm trying to think of other like sort of but they were like South Americans that had like moved up, and they were maybe first or second generation, but there wasn't many like white people that were playing football in America, and there was a lot of immigrants that had moved over that were then like playing for. It's interesting that it's the same in Canada as well. Like you said, like Scottish family, well, football is going to be like a sport that you're going to go into, and they've maybe not played ice hockey, so it's not a thing that they would be pushing you into. So the parents are so influential. Yeah,
the parents in Canada, because of what we had said, they're familiar with football, and they wanted to play it as well. So when the agent goes and speaks to them, I have found that Canadian parents are more inclined to go for the professional route if you have that opportunity, because they see their son is at that level. Whereas in the States, there's so many other sports, and the college NCAA is really drilled into the students or the players and the families from a young age. And because one kid might be playing basketball, another kid's playing NFL or football, another person playing ice hockey, they're all thinking NCAA. So just because he's playing football doesn't mean the plan is any different.
No.
And sort of all of those sports, ice hockey, basketball, all the leagues are created from the NCAA. Whereas the leagues around the world are already in existence without the NCAA. So if I say to a player, like, you can go to Europe at 18, or you can go to college at 18, and they think, well, we get a degree and we can maybe become a pro, but you're not going to become a pro till you're 22 or 21. And
even the opportunities might fall away, and
so sort of like the trajectory of development is a lot steeper if you go to Europe at 18 versus playing. So it's difficult because it's not my job as an agent to say you should go to a under 18s team in Holland versus a $60,000 a year scholarship at Duke or Syracuse, huge schools. Why would I? It's sort of like pressure on you. Like, I don't want to be responsible if this doesn't work out and you've given up.
So you just present them the options.
Yeah, like
go and have a think about it and see what you want to do, or do you give personal opinion there, or like what do you do in that situation?
It's a lot of circumstantial, really. Sometimes they might not get the full scholarship, and if they can get this opportunity to go pro, they'll take it. Or the family might say, look, we want the contract to be similar or more than what he would get in a scholarship. Which is difficult to do unless you're signing first team MLS, right? So so it's tough, but sometimes maybe they do go to NCAA and it is the best route for them, and they can still become professionals. But that sort of responsibility is difficult.
Like if they plateaued, they went to an academy in Europe, they plateau, they maybe don't make it professional, and then maybe they've missed out on the opportunity to get like a scholarship at a college and their degree paid for and education in the States, and I don't know if it's the same in Canada. It's a lot more expensive than it is here. I know in the States it's crazy. I know one of the things I found ridiculous was that apparently if you go bankrupt and you have student loan debt and you get like in England we'd call it benefits, but if you're on benefits in the States and you've gone bankrupt and you had a student loan, your student loan still gets deducted from the benefits that you receive from the government, which is crazy. But like to turn down such an opportunity to have that paid for, have a degree, maybe it gives you an alternative career to playing football. It's the difficult choice to weigh up for young players,
like
right?
if you have an academy, let's say, and there's an 18s team and there's 20 players, and an MLS academy, let's say 75% will have serious interest from colleges. Then the next 25% will say are on the pro route. So, but the colleges want this 25% player too, right? Because they're the best ones. But then the club wants them.
Probably not going to get them. Yeah.
And then an agent is there too. So I'm trying to maybe pull him to Europe, let's say, the best player.
Yeah.
Or get him a first team deal. Whereas if I was working with a player that, that didn't have the interest from the first team, maybe they don't have the same interest from a college because it's so concentrated. Like we're all fighting for the same percentage of the top players, right? So if you have this dilemma, it means that you're one of the top players. If you're not having college interest, you don't have first team interest.
It indicates like
it's harder for the agent because clearly. There's no hype there, or he needs to. Like we said at the beginning, he needs a change of environment. Maybe he needs to go to another, maybe a USL club, just to get
still professional.
Yeah,
still getting paid. It also depends on what the player's career goals are. Like for me, when I was younger, if I could have just got paid to play football, that's a win. That's success. Just get paid any amount of money. Like that's a success for me. And some of those players, it might be just to turn pro in USL is good enough, and that's what they want, and they're happy. Others in that environment might be going, like you said, Premier League or bust. I need to get into Europe because my end goal is to work and play in the Premier League or play in English football, play the Champions League. European football is, for a lot of people, the gold standard, and that's what they want to get to. So.
You can suss it out pretty quickly. Like I speak to a player, and they say like, I want to be a pro, and you can tell like, okay, his mindset's there. There's nothing that they care about. But like if I go on Instagram and see that the player's at a nightclub or something, it's like the top players aren't. It's not even in their consideration, right? And then on the other hand, I'll speak to some players and I'll say, well, what do you want to do if you went to school? What would you say? And they would say like brain surgery or like. And I'm thinking, okay, like this is a serious academic. I don't want to risk, his potential to become a significant doctor by,
filling his head with pipe dreams of.
If he wasn't on the path to sign with the first team, right?
So you got to be a little bit harsh, a bit like harsh truths, and just tell them like honestly.
I think it would be telling myself like, don't try to force him into another contract if. He's a straight A student. He's wanting to become...
modifying your approach rather than like telling them you're not good enough. Like maybe don't do that, but like modify your approach and don't push them too much to like take contracts that would compromise them doing the academic stuff as well.
Yeah, it depends, right? Like if at this year 17, 18, they're in grade 12. So like the 2007s are in grade 12. So they're like. Yeah, so it's almost it's almost Christmas, right? So a lot of the offers are coming in. Like I said, there's a tournament this weekend in California where
scouts everywhere.
It's basically in the player's mind, do or die. Like if I don't get a contract or a scholarship from this weekend, my career's over. But it hasn't even started yet. So that's going to be my managing after that. But if they don't get a contract, then you need to, what is the best route to go to school? Because
So you negotiate with the school as well?
No. I just tried to help them come to that acceptance, let's say. Because it wouldn't be worth it. If he's a top player that has, let's say, Syracuse, Duke, North Carolina, those are amazing schools with great reputations who are going to give them a fantastic experience. It's probably worth it for them to do that instead of going to a USL where, like I said, they might not play at the beginning. They're trying to grind into this professional atmosphere, and it's not paying so well. It might be worth it for them if they were in Europe and they can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but if there's nothing in Europe, then maybe it's better to go to college. And it's not a terrible route because half the Canadian national team honestly came from NCAA.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I could probably at least 5 or 6 players,
Well, Davis got snapped up really young, didn't he? And then, I'm trying to remember. It's just crazy that I shows that Andrea, the head of program leader for the sports psych team here, is the Canadian national team's sports psych. Like, she goes out and goes on camps and everything and works with them. So
really,
yeah. Do you not know that?
No.
You can get in conversation with her.
Yeah.
Because she's been doing that, and that's really interesting to hear from her and like what the players are like. And for me, my dream is to be like England sports psychologist at some point, or like I'd love to be Chelsea sports, obviously, like as a fan. And I think that's such a different dynamic of like, they've gone through a very different system, and they're maybe more educated than what like the standard English, not like talking like saying anything bad about English players, but they've had to go to college and they've had to study, and some of them might have done like proper degrees that like you said, like brain surgery, that they're really intelligent young men that are just very, very good at football. And that for me as a psych, that would be really interesting to work with them. This is very different to like players that have gone through, from my experience, working with players that are more educated or working with an athlete that's more educated is sometimes, it could either be a lot easier or it can be a lot more difficult. It's one of two ways. They ask you a lot more questions, which is what, but they might question you on like why we're doing what we're doing, but the education level is very different. And it's really interesting that a lot of them would have come out of like college football and then still make it to the national level.
That's because there was no Canadian league, right? So they basically had to, if you didn't get a first team deal at Toronto FC or Vancouver or Montreal, that was your
choice was college. Yeah.
And the best ones went to the NCAA. There's a lot that maybe didn't get us. Myself, I didn't go to the NCAA. I went to the Canadian system.
Okay.
So like I had offers like Division 2 or Division 1, but wasn't everything that I wanted. So I figured I'll go to the Canadian League and play there, and it was a good decision. But the best players go to the NCAA, and now they've become national team players. But it might not be as common as a route now because the Canadian League is there. So the ones that have this professional aspiration will go into that instead. Yeah.
So I'm aware of time. I've got some quick fire questions for you.
Nice. Okay.
What is one piece of advice you would give to like a young footballer? You could maybe do one like for Canadian, American footballers, and then maybe like young English players as well. But what's one piece of advice as an agent you would give to a young football player looking to make it professional?
Don't compare yourself to others, I think.
Don't compare yourself to others.
Yeah, don't compare. It's easy to, right? It will be harder not to, but no player's path is the same. If I pick 2 players and I put them in the same club and then the next same transfer, they wouldn't have the same career. So I think sometimes agents will say like, well, I represent this player, look what we can do for you. But like, even if you put them in that exact same path, they wouldn't get the same result. So don't compare yourself to others, because only you know every touch that you've done. Only you know if you shanked the pass. Only you know if you did it perfect. You see every touch you've done, and just work on, I think, on being better than you were yesterday, because all roads will lead to Rome. Like, everyone will see you. The football is, there's no stones unturned in football, and I think as long as you're focused on becoming better, the rewards will come and the contracts will come.
Don't focus on the external things of like other people. And I really like the phrase, and I don't know if you've heard this before, of comparison is a thief of joy. So like by comparing yourself to other people, you're only ever going to make yourself feel worse, because even if you think that you're better than that person, then you'll eventually compare yourself to someone who is better than you, and then you're always going to be in this perpetual state of like comparison, and that often will lead to you just not being happy.
And they sometimes, players will compare themselves to others, or parents will say, how come my son did this and that guy did this? But like, coaches make mistakes, right? Coaches make mistakes. They should have played him and they didn't. They made a mistake, and they take it personally, right? And it's never personal. I think it's sometimes people overlook the fact that coaches are learning too, right?
They're human. Yeah. The same, like, you're learning as an agent. I'm still finishing training as a psychologist. I'm still learning, like, and that's a key point, is that everyone's human. We're all making mistakes. We're all learning, and we're all on a journey to get to like where we want to be. So yeah, like, to understand that people are human as well. What's something, if I magically had powers, I was a superhero, and I could take you back to young Michael, who baby-faced, he's not got the beard yet, he's not got the majestic beard come in. What's a piece of advice that you would give to young, should we say like 18-year-old Michael? If the system was the same now, so if the system was the same as it is now with the new Canadian League and everything going on, what's a piece of advice you would give to young Michael?
You know, I trained at Celtic when I was 17. That's my team.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to stay, but I went back and finished high school. So I would say to myself, don't go back and finish high school, stay at Celtic.
Stay at Celtic.
Yeah.
So we could now, feasibly, we could have been watching you in the Scottish Premier League.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Alistair Johnson is better than I ever would have been. So it's better that he's there than
Fair
me.
enough.
So I think I would tell myself, don't worry. Just enjoy football for what it is, because you can get paid by being involved in football somehow.
Yeah.
Instead of, there's better players than you that you'll help out. That's what I would tell myself. Don't worry.
So you'd go back and you'd give some hard truths, is what you'd do. You'd go
I'd
back
probably
and
tell him to run more a little bit. Get stuck in tackles a little bit. Those would probably be my downside. I just live for free kicks.
Yeah. We played in the staff game last year. You run around like a madman. You've got a absolute bag full of energy in you, and you're like an engine on you when you're running around in the midfield. So, yeah, you telling yourself to run around more and get stuck in sounds crazy to me.
I knew people were watching that day. So.
You had a point to prove. I have to get around the pitch.
The students were watching, and I told them, stories. So I had to, at least run.
Yeah, you told them you were a baller, so you had to go out there and make sure like you made a point. So your piece of advice, go back to young Mike, and you'd be saying, just focus on getting maybe fitter, and maybe you've stayed at Celtic, but maybe not. Maybe focus on,
I think
the
that's
other things.
Specific to my sport and my journey. But like, I think generally I would say, you love football for football. Like, it's not because I still get to play on Sundays. I still watch.
Still fun. Yeah. Cool.
Don't fall in, like, you don't need to break up with football just because you don't become a professional. That's it.
Yeah. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people do release from academies or just fall out of, they have the burnout, and they fall out of love of the game and stop playing, right? So yeah, you can always still play. And I think for me now, it's just about having fun with my mates, like having good relationships and going for a pint after the game, and they're the things that I enjoy, rather than like when I was younger, it was like mine was more semi-pro, like get to semi-pro football. I knew I wasn't ever going to be professional, but get to semi-pro level and like be happy with that, because you've put in a lot of work to get there. And that for me was, but keeping the joy. I think that I got worse the less I enjoyed playing football. The less I enjoyed it, the more I hated going to training and didn't want to go and do the additional work. And a lot of that came off the back of like injuries. It was ACL injury, and then trying to get back fit again, and all that stuff is a huge impact.
That's what took the joy out.
Yeah. It was like, football was meant to be like this fun thing that you get to do with your mates, and I was getting a lot better than I'd ever been, and then stupidly played a 5-a-side tournament and just ruptured my ACL. And a terrible time. Took a year for surgery and all these things that just compounded. But then a lot of people will say this, and again, like, if you offered me, £50,000, £100,000 to go back and change that, would I do it? Probably not, because I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have learned these things that I've learned on the way, and it's something that's been quite a formative experience for me. So a lot of people, when they go back, and I don't know if you'd be the same, like, would you go back and change what you did because it led you to the point you're at now? Does that make sense? That, like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would, but.
Do you think that's why you're into the psychological aspect
100%.
because of your struggle? Yeah.
Yeah, like I really struggled with my injury, and I wouldn't be doing this now if I hadn't have had my injury. I think I might have started doing it, but I think the passion for it would have died. But because of that, I now like adamantly, specifically want to help injured players because I know what it's like.
Yeah,
I don't
similar
want people
to me,
have the
I
same
think.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, like I couldn't find avenues. I had my parents are from Scotland. That's how I ended up at Celtic. My family helped me out, but I was thinking like if only someone would tell me this is what you should do, or this is what, because your parents, as much as they help you and support you, but they're living it with you. They don't see the road
they're not
ahead,
in that
right?
world as well. Yeah.
So I think that's what I wanted to do, just to be somebody that somebody can reach out to. And I've helped players who, I didn't help sign a contract, but they're in a situation where they haven't got paid and they want to terminate the contract. So I helped them navigate the legal system and get their money back and leave the club.
Yeah.
So,
but the person that wasn't there for you when you were a younger player.
Yeah. So
it's
whether
really
it's
important.
legally or, trying to find new opportunities or, saying, okay, don't come with me and sign a pro contract. I think it's better for you to go to this school. And then we can touch base.
Yeah. Like, don't lose contact, stay in contact with me. Like, I'm still happy to support you, but I think this is a better option for you right now. Yeah. Last question, because we've both got lectures at 1, haven't we? Last question, what do the next sort of 5 years look like for Michael Tate?
I'm getting engaged. Oh, I'm engaged. I'm getting married in September.
Married,
So that's going to be it. I'd say 5 years I'll have a kid, but I would like I would like to have a player on the national team. I think the World Cup is coming, so that's a goal, I think. But it's not up to me, right? It's not even up to my players. Sometimes it's just the choice of the coach, right? So it's sort of an unrealistic goal, but it's sort of a ambition to keep working to be involved when the World Cup comes to Canada. I think it would be cool to see
one of your players walking out on the pitch.
It's not really a goal that I can work towards, right?
No.
But I think maybe expand my clientele and hopefully have national team players, I think.
Yeah. So like, you're working a lot with young players now, so hopefully they get to a point where they're a little bit older, more established, and then they start getting the recognition.
Yeah, I don't really have goals, but I just want to be with them on the journey and just see what happens, But my goal is, to have a family.
Have a family, get yourself married, then have a family, because they're all wrong, and then get someone in the national team, get one of your clients in the national team.
Yeah, I think sounds good.
Cool. Do you have, is it your agency, your own agency? Do you want to plug that at all? Like, do you have a name?
Just me. No,
just you.
Maybe I'll put that in the goals.
Yeah.
Establish a brand. Yeah.
Establish a brand. Establish yourself as an actual consultancy. Yeah.
Because now it's just individually, just me.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just Michael Tate on the contracts, but
it
might be cool to have like an Instagram page for an agency.
Yeah.
But it's not an immediate goal. But
put up some videos of your clients doing well and stuff. I know there's one I follow. It's called 89. I think after consultancy as well. I've got after sport consultancy I follow. Put little stuff on their clients and stuff. But I didn't know if you wanted to plug anything for your business.
That will be what I'll do. I'll establish that so that we can collaborate and
definitely. I'm happy if you set yourself up as a consultancy or an agency. I will happily be your agency's sports psychologist, mate. More than happy to do that and work with some up and coming Canadian talent. And we'll work together, and we will do it. We'll get them in the national team. We'll get this 16-year-old at Hull. We'll work with him, and we'll make sure he gets there eventually.
Sounds good. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No worries, man. Yeah, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate you coming on today, man. Been a really interesting conversation with you. I've learned a lot, to be honest with you.
We could keep going, I think.
I honestly, mate, I looked at the time, and I thought we'd been chatting for like 10 minutes. And then it had been an hour, And I was
Really?
like, what the hell? Like, that's absolutely flown by. So, yeah, like, really easy to sit and chat with you, mate. I'm sure I'll have you on again at some point and have another conversation. I'm going to be doing lots of podcasts, so yeah, I'm sure we'll get you back on again. Guys, thank you for tuning in to the Stoic Athlete podcast, and I will see you in the next one.